Hey y'all, welcome to Restless Chipotle Kitchen. Today we are going to make a recipe that has actually been the #1 recipe on the blog for 14 years, if you can believe it. And that is the very famous Restless Chipotle Amish white bread. It is delicious, it's no fail, it's easy to make, and you're gonna love it. This Amish white bread has been the #1 recipe on Restless Chipotle since 2010, and it's got thousands of 5-star reviews, comments. It's just everybody's favorite, and I don't know why I haven't done the video before, but we're doing it now. So what you're going to need is bread flour or all-purpose flour. If you use all-purpose flour, I strongly suggest that you go ahead and use gluten along with it, okay? Bread flour has more gluten in it. Gluten is the protein in flour, and it helps bread to rise high and light. So while you can use just all-purpose flour, your bread won't have the high rise that it will with bread flour or all-purpose flour with gluten flour. Butter, milk, and I'm using evaporated milk. So lots of old recipes call for you to scald the milk, and a lot of new recipes don't. The reason that milk used to be scalded is so that it would break up the proteins in the milk, and it would help your baked goods to actually perform better in the oven and be more tender and all of the things. If you use evaporated milk, there's no need to scald it because it's already been scalded. If you use regular milk, I still suggest that you go ahead and scald it before using. The way that you would do that is you put your 1 cup of milk into a saucepan and let it come almost to a boil. You'll see bubbles form around the outside of it in the pan, and then you would remove it from the heat and let it cool down to about 115 to 120 so that you can use it in the bread, right? Because you can't use hot stuff with yeast. You can use milk without scalding it, but I really recommend that you either use evaporated milk, which I love, as y'all well know, or regular milk and scald it, okay? Either way. You're gonna need oil, you're gonna need active dry yeast, or you could also use the quick acting yeast or rapid rise or whatever they're calling it. If you use rapid rise yeast, you don't need to go through the proofing stage with the yeast. And then I already told you about the gluten flour. Sugar. This bread has a lot of sugar in it. It's kind of a sweet loaf. If you would prefer it to not be so sweet, just cut the sugar in half down to 1/3 of a cup. I wouldn't cut it more than that the first time you make it. After that, you can experiment with it and see what you like. Ginger, powdered ginger. A lot of people ask me if you can taste the ginger in the bread, and the answer is absolutely not. You're just using a pinch, and it just helps to activate the yeast. It's an old trick that I learned in one of my really ancient cookbooks from the 1800s, and boy does it work. Salt and kosher salt. If you're using table salt, then use 1/4 less. So this recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and oh gosh, I hate math. You would use just maybe 1 teaspoon of table salt for 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. I know somebody out there is a mathematician, and they're going to tell me that's not exactly right, and I'm going to tell them it's okay. Water. Now this is potato water that I saved from potatoes that I cooked the other night. And anytime that I make potatoes, I don't salt the water, and I save it for bread making because that's another thing that helps the bread rise. Do you absolutely have to have it? No, you can use plain water in this, that's fine, but I'm just telling you what I use. And a Insta-read thermometer to make sure that the temperature of the ingredients isn't too hot, because it will kill the yeast. I like to use, in the summertime, I like for the liquids to be about 110 degrees. In the wintertime, I'll let them be maybe 115, but never over 120, okay? Or you will kill your yeast. Not a good idea. All right, so we're gonna set that aside. I'm gonna set all of this aside, because what we want to do first is proof the yeast. The way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna take a cup of this potato water, if I can find my cup measure. There it is. We're going to take a cup of this potato water and I'm going to heat it in the microwave and let it come up to 110 degrees. If it goes over 110, then I will let it sit there and cool down. All right, we've got the water nice and warm. I had to let it cool down for a few minutes, but right now it's showing just about 100 degrees, so that's warm enough. We're going to add all of the yeast, and we're going to add a tablespoon of the sugar. The yeast needs sugar to eat so that it can activate, and so you want to not ever leave out the sugar if a recipe calls for it, okay? Can you use honey instead of sugar? Yes, you can. You could use honey, you could use maple syrup, you could use any natural sweetener rather than sugar, but we're using sugar today. Just don't leave it out of a recipe, at least not the first time you make it. Generally, yeast will need it. Now, you can see that the yeast is already starting to clump up and starting to grow because it really loves that potato water. I haven't put the ginger in yet. Thank you for reminding me. And so we'll just put a pinch of ginger in there to help it along. And we should see some really good, quick growth there. So I'm going to set that aside for about 5 minutes and I'll be back. Okay, we have the yeast, and you can see that it's foamed up quite a lot, and it's looking really good right now. We're going to go ahead and pour the yeast into our mixing bowl. And KitchenAid works great for this. It's not a problem. I prefer to use this instead of my KitchenAid because it allows you to see what's going on in here. Okay. Now, I do have my flour all measured out, so I'm going to stir in 1 cup of flour, and I've already measured this out, so I've spooned it into the cup and leveled it off with a knife. Okay, now I can scoop because I've got the correct amount in the bowl. But when you're measuring, be sure that you use a spoon, you spoon it into the cup lightly and then level it off in a bowl with the back of a knife. So there's 1 cup. And I'm going to go ahead and add the gluten flour. Usually you want to add about 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons per cup of flour and remove that much of the all-purpose flour from your measurement, okay? And we're going to add the milk. And the milk has been warmed to 110 degrees. Let me just double check it, make sure it's not too hot or too cold, because it's been sitting here for a minute. And it is right at 110 degrees, so, and we're just gonna put that in. Now, usually you're gonna have your mixer running on low while you're doing this, but since this will be loud, it'll cover up anything I'm gonna say, so I want to make sure that I said everything I had to say before I started the mixer. So we're going to add the milk. Oops, made a mess there. And I'm going to add the sugar. Okay, I'm going to get that going. Now I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So that's half, half, half. And I did that because I couldn't find the teaspoon measure or the 1.5 teaspoon measure in the drawer. And I'm going to add the oil. Coconut oil is great for this. A light vegetable oil is fine. If you prefer butter, you can use melted butter that's been cooled to at least like 110 or less. And then we're just going to turn it on, and I'll start adding the rest of the flour a little at a time until soft dough is formed. I've used up all of my flour, but as you can see, this dough is still very wet and sticky. It has been very humid here for the last several days. And sometimes when that happens, you're going to need extra flour. So making bread is not rocket science. Sometimes the recipe will call for 5 to 5.5 cups, and it may be able to take you 6 to 6.5 cups. Yes, you need to go by the recipe, but you also need to go by the feel of the dough. That's why baking perfect bread takes experience. Okay, you need to know how the dough should feel, and that just takes time. Your first loaf of bread is probably not going to be totally perfect, although this recipe will get you really, really close. So I'm going to turn this back on, and I'm going to add more flour until it's what I want. When the dough cleans the sides and bottom of the bowl like it is here, that means you've got enough flour, and you'll be able to feel it in the dough. Now you want to go ahead and knead it for about 2 minutes. All right, we've got a pretty good knead on there, but I wanted to take it out and knead it by hand so you can see how that was done, because you can actually knead this bread by hand. It just takes a little bit longer, and there's a technique to it that I want to show you. Okay, when we go to knead bread, we want to put just a very little bit of flour on the board. And I'm going to take this out. Now, I'm not going to knead this very long because it's already kneaded, but I do want to show you how to do it. Plus, I just like to knead the bread for a few minutes after it's kneaded by machine. That way I can just really tell if it needs more kneading or what it might need. So the way we're going to do this is when you're kneading bread, you push out, you pull back, you give it a turn, and you push out again. Okay, let me see if I can get you closer. All right. So we're going to push out, pull back, turn, push out, pull back, and turn. And you just keep doing that until you get that elastic texture that you're looking for. Now this is quite elastic now, and so I don't think it probably needs any more kneading. And the way that I can tell, there's several ways to tell if it's been kneaded enough. The first way is if you pinch it, it's going to feel like your earlobe. So if you pinch it between your thumb and your index finger, it's going to have the same texture as your earlobe. That means it's done enough. Also, if I stretch it, it pulls back. Watch. Stretch it, pulls back. That's elasticity. and that shows that it's been kneaded enough. The other way is some people do what's called a window pane test, where they take a piece of the dough and they stretch it out to see how thin they can get it. And if they can kind of see through it, then that's good. I have never had luck with that test, so I'm not going to recommend that one, but definitely the earlobe and making sure that it is stretchy, elastic. All right, so we're going to round that up into a nice little ball. I'm going to drizzle some oil in the bowl so it doesn't stick. You don't need much. You don't want it to be oily. So we're just going to move that around. And then we're going to put our bread in, and we're going to turn it over because we want all the sides to be oiled. In fact, I'm going to put a little bit more oil on the top. You don't want the bread to form a crust on the dough. That will keep it from rising well. This is going to rise for about an hour, maybe a little bit more. It's cool in my kitchen, so it may take a little bit longer than that. Generally, you can count on it rising in about an hour, but you may need to give it an hour and a half if your kitchen is cold or you don't have a proofing oven. So I'm going to cover it with a clean tea towel, and that's it. There go my dogs. I'm going to cover it with a clean tea towel, and I will let that rise for an hour. I'll see you back here then. Okay, y'all, this is certainly doubled. It actually took a little bit longer than I expected, and it took an hour and a half to rise. We can tell it's risen because I can poke my finger in it and the indentation stays there. It doesn't fill back up. So I'm going to turn it out onto my board, and I'm going to punch it down. And by punching it down, I don't mean to get violent with it. You want to take all of the biggest air bubbles out, but you don't want to take all the air out of it, okay? So just punch it down like that, just nicely. If you can punch nicely, okay? I'm going to try to get this the same size, and I'm probably going to go ahead and weigh it just to make sure, because this does make 2 loaves. And cutting it like that is going to, one thing that did happen that I noticed is that even though I had oiled the top, it did develop a little bit of a film on there. So I'm hoping that that doesn't leave a great big hole in the bread, but it might. Let's see if I got this the same size. £1 pound 6 ounces, 1 pound 10 ounces, 1 pound 8 ounces. Let's try again. 1 pound, yeah. Okay, they're close enough. Now this dough rises twice. Some bread recipes just call for the dough to rise once. Some call for 3 times. So you just need to really read your recipe carefully. I probably need to take my watch off again too. I had that hour and a half break, and I put my watch back on so I could keep track of what I was doing. All right, so there's 2 ways to shape your bread. You can, I'm really concerned about this right here. Because it's dry, it will have a tendency to leave a big hole and not actually come together. So we'll see. The first way to do it is just to shape it, just shape it like that, and roll it into a log and just pat it into shape. And that usually will give you a nicely shaped loaf of bread once it rises in the pans. The other way that you can do it, and see here again, this has got this on there where it may not adhere as well as I'd like it to. We may have a big hole in the middle of the bread, but we'll see. The other way to do it is to roll it, and you would roll it out into a rectangle, and try to get everything even so that it's not fatter on one side than the other. And then you would take that rectangle and just roll it up, pinch together. Can y'all see this? First of all, y'all know that in videos, if I make a mistake or if I'm having a problem, I don't edit that out. Because if I'm having a problem after, oh gosh, I don't even want to think about how many years I've been making bread. 50? Yikes. 50 years. If I'm having a problem after 50 years making bread, I can tell you that the possibility of y'all having a problem is definitely there. So I don't want it to be fake and like, oh, I never have problems, because I do. So I want to show this to you. This is, you can see that white on there. That's the dry part. That's where the dough kind of dried out while it was doubling. And so we don't know what's going to happen with that, what is going to happen on the inside. Anyway, so you pinch your dough together like that on the underside once you roll it up, and just, you can either go like this and then tuck this under and pinch, 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 or you can leave those ends out. But what you're looking for is you want a loaf of bread that's shaped nicely, and in order for it to be shaped nicely, it has to go into the pan shaped nicely, okay? So if you want it to be even and high in the middle, it needs to go into your bread pan even and high in the middle. A lot of times I'll tuck under with my little fingers like that, and that's a pretty nice loaf of bread. This one could use a little help, so I'm just gonna do that a little bit. Looks like it's gonna have a place here where it splits, but we'll see. Normally I get a real pretty loaf out of this dough, but of course, because I'm doing it on video and I want it to be super pretty, you know, that's when the problems are gonna happen, if they're gonna happen at all. All right. And we're just going to spray down the bread pans. Make sure they're good and covered with the stuff. So we're just going to fit that right in there. And we're going to take this one and fit it right in there. And then I'm going to take my butter. I'm going to go and melt it, and I'll be right back. Okay, here's our butter, and it's still really hot, so I'm going to let that cool for a minute. But while I was gone, I did check, and these are 9 by 5 inch loaf pans. I'm not so worried about butter on the outside killing the yeast at this point, so I don't have to worry about letting it cool down that much. We're just going to give it a good brush with the butter. Be sure to get the sides. That helps the crust, it helps get the one more time, it helps the crust brown nicely. It gives it a nice color, and of course butter, it gives it a good flavor. This is going to rise for about 30 minutes, and I will be back when it's risen and ready to go in the oven. Okay, the bread has risen. It's been rising for about 30 minutes, and it's come over the top of the bread pan. You can see it's nice and puffy. The other thing is, you might see let the bread rise until light, or let the dough rise until light. And what that means is, if you pick it up like this, it feels much lighter than it did before it had risen. It's the weirdest thing, but it does. I guess because of all the air in it, I don't know. Anyway, so you can pick it up and you can actually, with a little practice, can tell that it's risen double just by how it feels when you pick it up. This was the loaf that we shaped with the rolling pin. This was a loaf that we shaped by hand, and this loaf does not have quite the nice shape that this loaf does. So that just gives you an idea of whether you want to take the time to shape it with a rolling pin or whether you just want to put it together and put it in like that, okay? So I will be brushing this with butter one more time. And then, oh, the butter kind of got hard here in my kitchen. And then they'll go into the oven at 350 for about 30 minutes. When you're brushing the top of the loaves right before they go in the oven, remember that you want to be very, very gentle in what you do, because you don't want to deflate the loaves. Okay, so we're ready to go, and I will see you back here when they're baked in 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, we're going to take these out of the oven. They've got a beautiful brown crust on them. It smells amazing in this kitchen, absolutely amazing. Now, if you prefer that your crust not be that brown, you can put aluminum foil over the tops when it gets to be the color that you want it to be. I like a nice brown crust, but in my family, we like a soft crust. So if you like a crispy crust, then you're gonna let these cool about 5 minutes in the bread pans, and then you're going to take them out and let them cool completely without anything over them. But if you're like me and you have a family that's addicted to Wonder Bread, what you're going to want to do is brush with butter, because can you even ever get enough butter on bread? I don't think so. So you're going to brush it with the butter, and then we're going to cover it with the tea towel that we used when we covered it for rising. And we're going to let it cool under the tea towel, and that will keep the crust nice and soft. So whichever way you want to do it, that's the big secret of a crispy crust or a soft crust. This is the loaf that was rolled out and shaped, and this is a loaf that wasn't. They're not all that different, and I'll show you the differences when we get them out of the pans. But for right now, we're going to put this over them and set them on their sides like that. Then put that over. What that does is it allows the bread to steam a little bit, and it loosens the bread from the sides of the bread pan. And so I'm going to let it sit like that for about 5 minutes, because I don't want the bottom to get soggy, but I don't want the sides to get soggy, but I do want it to be easy to remove. And in a couple of minutes, I'll come back and I'll show you just how easy it is to remove the bread from this. Okay? All right, it's been a few minutes. The loaves are still really hot, but we want to take them out of the bread pans because we don't want them to get soggy. Now remember, I turned them on their sides and covered them so that the crust would be soft and so that they'd be easy to remove from the pans. That's my little trick that I learned a long time ago. And so they just come right out. And you can tell that it's done all the way through. That's that hollow sound that you want to look for. And this one comes right out. It's a great trick, isn't it? Okay. If you cut bread when it's hot, it's going to tear, it's going to shred, it's going to mush, and it's going to be terrible. So as much as I don't want to wait, because this kitchen smells absolutely delicious, I've got to wait until they've cooled down enough that they're safe to cut. And so I will be sitting here counting down the minutes, and I'll be right back. Okay, y'all, these have cooled quite a lot. They're still warm, and normally I would let them cool down even more before I cut into them. But yeah, I can't wait. So we're going to do it now. Now, this loaf is the one that we formed without the rolling pin. We just patted it together. And you can see that it's not really even on the top. It's kind of bumpy, and it's going to be delicious, but it's shaped kind of weird. This loaf has got a nice round top. It's shaped much better. So I've done it both ways, and I just wanted you to know what your options were as far as shaping the loaves into like a normal loaf. Now, I'm not going to cut this one because I need to get some new pictures, but this, I'm going to cut this one right now. And let me tell you, I can't wait. It's getting dark outside, and I'm kind of worried that the light is going to get weird in here. Making bread is definitely an all-day thing. But, okay, so I just want you to see this loaf. You can squeeze it. The crust is soft. It's not crispy. So that's how we like it. Again, remember, if you want a crispier crust, don't cool it with a towel on top of it. But let's take a look at the inside and see what we've got. Look how beautiful that is. The crumb is just gorgeous. It's still a little bit warm, and when you cut bread when it's warm, it kind of forces it together so it becomes more dense. But I sure didn't want to wait. And I can guarantee you that I'm going to put some butter on this, since we've got it right here and it's all nice and melted. And look at that. Doesn't that look delicious? Okay, y'all, this bread is, just really want to show you. Can you see? Let's see, there we go. Can you see how beautiful that is on the inside? So good. And one of these days I'll learn to take really tiny bites so that I'm not chewing and talking at the same time. This is so delicious. It's got, I want to say, like first of all, it's been shared over 1 million times on Pinterest. Second of all, it's got hundreds of 5-star reviews, maybe even 1,000. I've lost count. There's tons of comments on the blog, and you can read through them, pages and pages of comments about how people love this bread. It is so good. Even if you've never made a yeast bread before, excuse me, I promise you can do this. It's easy. And just take it step by step in the recipe, watch the video, and you're going to do great, okay? All right. I love y'all. And I hope you'll come back next week. I hope you'll try this recipe because it is absolutely wonderful. And yeah, I guess that's about it. I'll see y'all next week, okay? Love y'all. Bye-bye.